I am ready.
Okay, let me give a couple first announcements here. Good morning, everyone. So glad you're here. Glad you're enjoying the conference as we all are. Don't forget our recordings today will be available later. If you have any questions today, make sure you put them in the chat box. And then don't forget to check your email. I think it's already arrived for your sketches validation form if you need that. So let me remind you all to keep muted. And with that, I'd like to introduce Amy Wasserman. So excited.
Thank you. All right. I am so excited to be here. I presented last year and had so much fun. I think you guys normally meet in person, and hopefully we'll get back to that. But this has been just a fun conference, and so much energy and so much passion and so many wonderful ideas around the work that you do, that when Patrick asked me to come back this year, I was like, most definitely, I am coming back and I'm hanging out with all of you. So thank you so much. This session is on SEL Classroom Strategies, and just really some easy, quick takeaway ideas of building those competencies in your students, in the adults that you work with. And some of these strategies you could probably even do in your personal life, which is always helpful as well. Here we go. All right. So a little bit about me. I'm the Whole Child Program Director for Saginaw ISD. I've been in that role for almost 14 years. I love it because I get to do all of the fun things, anything from whole child work. I work with teachers on sex ed and HIV instruction and how to have those conversations with their students. We also have a Project Dottie program where we provide feminine care products to our students who need them in the school setting. So right in the student bathrooms, in the unisex bathrooms, available for them to kind of take as needed and take home, because guess what? Our kiddos are not coming to school because they don't have the products they need while they're on their periods. And I just thought that that was just an easy fix, and it should never be a reason why our students are missing school. So I get to do some of the really fun stuff. And the number one fun thing I have is just working with educators around how do we support students, how do we support one another and ourselves. So that's kind of my role, but I just accepted a new position through MDE as their SEL consultant, school consultant. So I'll be shifting roles the end of November. It's kind of scary. Like I'm practicing some self-care and some SEL strategies of my own as I'm going through this process, but I'm very excited to be able to focus on this important work and being able to support not only my region of schools, but the whole state. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm just kind of shifting. So that part is exciting as well. So just to give a brief overview of the session. Oh, and I got to look over here and make sure I'm letting people in. If I look over here, it's because I have two monitors. And so I'm just making sure that I am letting everyone in who needs to be in. And I'm also checking the chat. So if you have a question, go ahead and ask. And then if I miss any, Brenda will help me, I think. So I think she can see the chats as well. So today, we're going to have a brief overview of the case for SEL. I'm not going to need to sell it very much because y'all came here because you believe in it and you know why it's needed. But really the focus is going to be providing those easy, low cost to no cost activities that you can implement in a classroom, that you can implement if you're doing small groups or even one-on-one. And so I really want you to think about these activities and how you would tweak them or utilize them in the work that you're doing with students. So I'm going to give you a lot of ideas. So that's kind of the hope. Is what I hear is, I already know all of this. I just need something that I can take and implement Monday with my students. And so I hope I give you plenty of that. Real brief, though, we are going to go over the 5 competencies that we really focus on. And we're really looking at Castle's competencies. So that self-awareness. Who am I? What are my feelings? How do my values and my experiences influence my behavior? And really, I think that's huge. When we're working with youth, sometimes it's hard for them to put a label on a feeling or how to understand their experiences, their values. If they're tired in the morning or hungry, how that can play out in behavior. And I think once we can help students with that, the rest is really easy. But then also looking at self-management. How do I manage those behaviors once I put a label on it and identified what I'm feeling? So how can I manage all of that? That responsible decision making, that is huge with our students. And sometimes we have students who don't have a lot of opportunities to make their own decisions. And so they're lacking in that skill, and they just need that support and encouragement and an opportunity to practice. And then relationship skills, that's huge. I have 2 high schoolers at home, and God bless you all for having whole classrooms of teenagers, because my 2 at home, bless you. So I'll I'll just say that. God, I love my kids, but sometimes I'm like, okay, you need some social emotional learning lessons. But then social awareness. How do we learn empathy? How do we learn kindness? How do we make decisions that are sometimes best for the group, and for the whole, versus maybe what's always best for me? How do we look at that social awareness piece? And so I think all of those pieces are so valuable in the work that we're doing, because we want to build that self-efficacy. We want to build that self-discipline, that delayed gratification when we're looking at risk behaviors around substance misuse or sexual behaviors. It's how do we teach, one, great relationship skills, but also that self-discipline and that delayed gratification, so that they can make decisions that are truly what's best for them. And then goal setting. What we're seeing is our businesses are begging for our school systems to focus on these skills, because they're getting employees coming in that don't have these skills. And what they're saying is, I can teach them how to do their job. I can't teach them to think for themselves or to problem solve or to get along with their coworkers or to get along with their supervisor. That is so, that's what's lacking when we talk with the business world, at least in my community. I don't know what it's like in yours, but they're saying, please, we need those social emotional learning skills, those soft skills, so to speak. And then relationships. I think with COVID and the shutdown, this is really lacking, or there's a delay in that, because that interpersonal face-to-face opportunities of relationship building, of communication, of working together as a team looked vastly different during COVID when we were remote. And so when we start looking at our teens, and we start looking at our young adults who are coming back to get their GEDs and their diplomas, they've missed some of that. They've missed a year and a half of that practice and that work. And so we need to help with that. But just that empathy piece, I feel, again, like what we're seeing is a lack of empathy, a lack of kindness as a nation. At least that's what's being portrayed in the media. And I think what we need to do is we really need to start highlighting all of the positive pieces that are being done. But then how do we build that with our staff, with our students? So I've broken down the activities based kind of on themes. And the first theme is equity. So what can we do when we have students in front of us around social emotional learning around equity? Because the reality is we really, oh shoot, sorry. Hope y'all didn't. Okay, so sorry for the blurriness of this, but we all heard this phrase: relationships before rigor, grace before grades, patience before programs, love before lessons. It all fits around, first we need to connect with our students. I was at a SEL conference that MDE was putting on earlier this week, and they added the bottom line that says equity before education. And so if we're really going to focus on SEL work, the key is that we also need to look at it through an equity lens. And that's so important. But in the same token, my favorite quote was, "Oh, are you not seeing the dang it, sorry, you don't need to see me."
That's what I was just going to ask you. Somebody was asking if you were pushing your slides.
Yes. Okay. Can you
Perfect.
see it now? I am so sorry. I do this all the time. And, even us. All right. Thank you for letting me know.
Amy, this is Karen Lynn. Can you go back to those, what you had said just prior
Yeah.
to this? Thank you.
I will go back.
It was great. It seemed more like a conversation rather than like a presentation. So it was great.
I do appreciate that. And sometimes I forget to unshare my screen so we can all see each other's faces. So I'll make sure I do that at the end when we have a more dedicated Q&A time. But I didn't say this at the start. Please feel free to unmute and ask a question throughout the process. I want this to be conversational. I want this session to meet your needs. And so if you need me to speed up somewhere, let me know. If you need me to slow down somewhere, let me know that too. But I want to learn from you all as well as you getting some resources from me. So I think this is where yes. So basically, and I uploaded the PowerPoint in my session on WOVA. So you have access to all these slides as well. So you don't have to take like a ton of notes unless you want some specifics. So really what I did is when I was talking about the 5 competencies, this is from Castle, and I like how it kind of highlights each piece and what it focuses on. So you can kind of see the work that you're doing, because here's the thing, you're doing a ton around SEL. You might not know it necessarily, or you may not have consciously made the link of when I do this in class or when I do this with my students, I am actually reinforcing self-management or self-awareness. And so I think it's really important that we work through that process of knowing and letting students know this is what we're working on right now. It's not just the content of what I'm teaching you, but we're also learning responsible decision-making because you're identifying problems, you're finding options and solutions, and then you're evaluating and reflecting on that. And so really putting these labels on will also help students realize that it's not just the core content that they're doing, they're strengthening their own social emotional learning skills as well. All right, so when we look at equity, so here's the blurry picture that you didn't see, but now you do. But I really liked that equity before education piece, because I think everything, if we really need to be looking at it through that equity lens and making sure that what we're doing is not just for a few students, but that it's for all. And the one quote that really stood out at the SEL conference was Dr. Serena Shivers said, SEL and DEI, if you're investing in one, you're investing in both by default. And I think that's just huge, because when you're looking at the SEL work, you're really creating that equity piece amongst your students and in your classroom, but you're also allowing students to kind of let you in on their culture, what they've experienced, and that will often map how you engage with that student. It also creates an opportunity for other students to have a better understanding of where their peers are coming from. And so I think that piece is key. So when we're looking at that equity lens and implementing equity through that SEL standpoint, think about ways that you can promote awareness of diverse ethnic and racial identities and experiences. How can you start those conversations with your students in your classrooms, with your small groups? So I may say classrooms, but think about it in the context of how you engage with students and in that reference. But then also, don't be afraid to talk about or address racial injustices. Utilize current events to start having conversations. Find a way to kind of develop some safety rules so that you all can have that honest dialogue. But sometimes just giving 5-10 minutes to talk about what's going on in the world or what's going on in your community is really going to help, one, students feeling that we're not ignoring what's going on, but also giving them an opportunity to share their vantage point of what's going on. And I think that's really key. A lot of SEL is around relationship building and creating that psychological safety piece. That's so important. Students aren't going to share. They're not going to put themselves out there. They're not going to take risks, whether it's personal or academic, if they don't feel safe in your classroom to maybe not be right? And so how do we have those types of conversations? How do we acknowledge and address xenophobia? But then how do we support student voice, agency, and power in schools? And I think that's really key. When I don't know how many of you do the MyFi survey in regards to getting student perception data. But that is key as we are looking for ways to provide student voice. And what we see is as they move from like middle school to high school, they feel like they have less of a voice in that school setting. So how do we get them to kind of own, how do we get students to kind of have that voice, but then also own their environment and take the lead and power in that? What do you already do, or how do you see being able to incorporate some equity pieces in your instruction currently? And you can put it in the chat or you can unmute, whichever you prefer. Or how do you learn about students' experiences?
Say good morning. I teach English, and I have a social studies background. I'm a history and sociology major, and I do a lot of things with learning about all different types of things that are going on in the world around us, and we do a lot of discussions about it and personal writings about it, and that's how we start out a lot of good conversations.
And I love that idea of utilizing a writing technique, especially when you're starting these types of conversations, because that is a safety piece. Students might be more willing to write things down rather than to maybe have a group discussion in class. And so I think as we have to think about this as a layered approach. We might be talking very basically at the beginning of the school year as we're developing that relationship or building that trust as a classroom community. And as that builds, then we can kind of have deeper conversations, or where it might be a little riskier. it kind of reminds me of when I'm working with my teachers around sex ed programming. They don't teach sex ed in September, October. They teach it towards the end of, elementary, towards the end of the school year. If it's secondary, it's more towards the end of the semester, because they want to build those relationships first in order for students to feel comfortable enough to maybe ask questions. And I feel this piece is the same way, where you're building that trust. So you're keeping it maybe a little more generic, a little later, until that trust is established and built. And then you can start adding deeper conversations and really starting to dig into some of what's going on and things like that. All right. I thought this quote was pretty powerful. It's literally neurologically impossible to build memories, engage in complete thoughts, or make meaningful decisions without emotions. And so my takeaway from this is, if we're not creating that safety and that connection in a community where students feel comfortable and they feel like they're in a caring relationship or a caring environment, then they're not going to be able to learn. They're not going to be able to really make the best decisions or really comprehend or explore that learning at the fullest, if we're really not working on how do we help them identify those emotions? How do we build that connection with students? And I think that's key. So here are some strategies for building relationships with your students and as a classroom or a group. Now, I don't know, what are your average classroom sizes in your classroom, in your building? Are they typically smaller? Do you 6 to 15? Awesome. 15 to 20? Okay. Oh, I love our new addition. The sucker is super cute. Hey. I always love when family pops in to see what's going on. So 1 to 12 students. Okay, so here's an idea. Instead of doing attendance the traditional way, whether you just look at who's here, who's not, or go down the list, think about something fun and lighthearted. Like, I'm going to do attendance, and I want you, instead of saying here, I want you to list your favorite ice cream flavor. And so it's a way of students, it's a way to get to know students in a different format. It's a way to kind of mix it up and have students learn more about each other. So something as simple as that. And you could have fun questions. You could actually have your students come up with the questions, and then you just pull one, what questions they're going to have to answer each day for attendance. But thinking about ways that you can incorporate learning more about your students without taking a ton of extra instructional time away from that. And it might be okay, you have one word, that's all you get. Give us the answer. Or are you a mountain or beach vacation person? Think of and just kind of come up with some neat things like that in regards to attendance. Something simple is greeting students at the door and greeting them by name. I will say my favorite teacher in high school greeted us all by name. He gave us all middle name nicknames. Like he called it, I was Amy Sue, even though my middle name's not Sue, but he made a point of greeting every student, and his story was pretty powerful. He didn't tell it right away, but he had a student who was down one day and he did not say hello. And that night, that student completed suicide. And he really took it personally. And from that moment on, he said, I am there at the door every day, greeting every student that comes into my classroom. And so that was a pretty powerful piece. Something else that might be an idea is mandatory check-ins with the counselor or the teacher. And thinking about, it doesn't have to be anything serious. It could be, I'm going to check in with 3 of my students every day and just to say hey and start building that relationship. What we found is the student panel this week at the conference said, we have counselors who are there to meet us and help us with our mental health needs, but it's really hard to go to somebody when you don't have a relationship with them, or you've never really run into them in any other way than I'm feeling depressed or I'm feeling anxious. And so they actually recommended, the youth recommended mandatory check-ins, just so it could be something as simple as, hey, how was your weekend? So that when that student needs to go to someone and go to the counselor, that relationship has already been established. And I thought, how powerful is that? A principal said that they do this with their staff, but you could easily do it with your students, is write names on popsicle sticks and take a couple out each day. And those are the 3 students or 5 students that you're going to connect with, and just have a 1 or 2 minute conversation and check in with them and learn something about them. And then you do that until all of your popsicle sticks are gone from that jar, and you start the process over. And so what it does do is it's intentional. It's intentional that you reach every student, because I think when we go through the day, or through the school year, sometimes we forget that we maybe thought that we reached out to this student and we haven't. But this is a real tangible way to make sure that you're reaching every student. I don't know if you can do this, but the students also talked about longer breaks between classes that allowed for peer-to-peer communication and connection, but also connecting with teachers between classes. And they said it wasn't a lot of time, but it was a few extra minutes. And it all started with mask breaks last year with COVID, is they gave them more time so they could go outside and have some fresh air and some mask break options. And they decided to keep it because what it allowed for teachers to maybe check in more with their students, or students to kind of hang back in class and ask a question, knowing that the next class isn't in there ready to learn, that there was that delay in the next class coming in. And I thought that was a really neat idea. Speed networking. This idea is, we call it speed dating, but your students would probably laugh at that. But really what it is you have students find a handful of other students, and they have a question that they have to answer. And you only do it for a few minutes. And it could be content. It could be, if you're teaching English and you have a book, you could talk about a theme and have them really hit on like the main character. And then after 5 minutes of that conversation, they have to find a handful more different students. And there's a second question that they have to answer. But you could do it with content, or like core content, or you could have a get to know you kind of activity, where you're learning about similarities and differences of one another. But what that really does is it works through communication, learning other people's thoughts and beliefs, their viewpoint and vantage point of something. If you're all reading the same article or talking about the same content, getting with other peers and realizing they're seeing things differently is a great SEL skill to learn. And so that can be something that really is engaging, because the students are getting up and moving around. And then you can dictate what that one question is through that process. I'm just going to talk about what works for us when we're doing professional development works with our students too. So turn and talks, gallery walk is great for those students who maybe are a little more introverted and maybe won't speak out, or a gallery walk, they can walk around and just put Post-it notes on thoughts. And then you could have them get into small groups and discuss what everyone kind of put up on the board as you're walking through. I already talked about the popsicle stick piece. Walk the line or four corners is a great activity to learn about similarities and differences of your group. And basically, you can ask a question like, would you rather watch the movie or read the book? And then they would go this side or that side, or you could have four corners with four different options. And so you're asking questions and they're moving there. And then you're getting people to kind of talk about this piece. Why are you in this corner? Who would like to share? But really the main point is keeping things simple at the start. And I think that is really the way to go. And then as that culture builds and that family feel builds, then you can get into some of those deeper conversations. Oh, good. You're doing speed networking later. That is so fun. Awesome. Oh, I love the one-to-one, one-on-one orientations. I think that's great. Awesome. Yes, teachers are so special. And I will always say there's not a ton of content that I remember from high school, but I remember the teachers and how they made me feel. And I think that's really the key. And so keeping all of that in perspective, I know we have the powers that be that say everything is based on test scores, but in the grand scheme of things, it is about relationships and building that first. The next piece is student voice. So ways that you can kind of build student voice, which hits on so many different of those SEL competencies. Think about class rules and getting that buy-in. How do you get students to kind of create class rules that they want to follow? Because if they create them, they're more likely to call one another out if they're not following them, and they're more likely to follow those pieces. So how do you, what are some rules that you would allow your students to kind of come up with? And I would say keeping it short and sweet and simple is the best way to go. Weekly plans versus daily plans. Is there an opportunity, and maybe you already do this, but giving students what the homework plan looks like for the week and giving them the opportunity to figure out when they're going to do things. I think that's great for, students who maybe have jobs or they have to take care of family members when they get home, or they're involved in some kind of groups or extracurricular activities, but giving them the option and then helping them goal set to make sure that the assignments get done on time. But it does allow for that flexibility for students. So it gives that student a voice of, I'm going to complete all of the work. I have the power to choose when by a certain date. And so I think that that's a really easy thing that doesn't take necessarily extra classroom time when you're doing that. Giving students options. And I think most of us have like that opportunity to turn assignments in online versus handing them in class. And so just, again, giving students options where they feel like they have a say in what goes on. Have your students lead a mindfulness activity or a yoga, or if you have someone that is a really good dancer and they want to teach, like fancy like, my kids are like all laughing at me because I was trying to figure out the fancy like dance. And then my daughter was like, please don't do that when we go to the wedding reception. And I'm like, well, if they're playing it, I might get out there and do it. So, but let them lead an activity that they're very knowledgeable about. And that gives that sense of ownership and pride. It also lets them know that just because they're younger doesn't mean that they don't have skills to share. And I think that's huge. So thinking about what are some of the skills that my students have, and maybe they don't have a skill in mindfulness, but the homework assignment is, if you want to lead a mindfulness activity, find one, share it with me, and then we'll figure out a day where you could lead the class in a mindfulness activity. And then starting the class with activities, something fun, whether it's a physical activity or it's a question. We are implementing Character Strong in Saginaw County. And what I really like about Character Strong is not only does it have an SEL character curriculum, but it has a lot of activities, like 2 to 3 minute activities that build community in your classroom, or they have student dares each month where you might dare a student to show kindness, and week 1 might be, hey, hold the door open for somebody. That might be the dare for that week. And it just kind of builds that common message that you're putting in the classroom, building wide. And so they have student dares, and they have staff dares, and then they have family dares. So you can even expand it to families as well if you want to make that link. So another idea for building voice is the rose, bud, and thorn. I'm a DJ, it's not easy, yes. Okay, side note, when I was growing up, I really wanted to be a backup dancer for Janet Jackson. A little bit about me. Yes, and it just didn't happen. So here's an activity. When you get done with a conversation, or done with a unit, or done with the day, rose is something positive and worthy of celebration. A bud is something that you're looking forward to based on what you did that day. And a thorn is something new that you might need help with. And that is a great tool for you as the educator to understand, maybe, is there a common theme of thorns? And that gives you the direction of, okay, this is what I need. This is what my students need. So this is a great activity. I do this one with my professional development sessions. This is a lot of fun too. The student becomes the master. So giving students index cards and saying, what is one thing you can teach me? And that gives you some insight into maybe what their hobbies are or what they're good at. But then you can also utilize that in your day, in your class session. Have any of you done any of these yet? Some of them? Awesome. The next piece is really looking at student advocacy. So, we give the students their voice, and then we sit there and say, how can you give voice to others? So not only do you ways for you to stand up for yourself, but then how can you be advocates for others, whether it's your peers, whether it's an advocate for your school or your community. Wellness Wednesdays, and you can call it whatever you want, but thinking about clubs, what are some clubs? What are some passions? And maybe it's that master skill piece when you see that you have people that are passionate about whether it's mental health or whether it's managing stress and anxiety, having a Wellness Wednesday and maybe having students plan activities or informational pieces for the whole school. The other thing is if you do MyFi surveys, that perception data, giving students either your students' data to review and look at, or you could do your county, which is available online for anyone to see. If there's enough schools that do it, I'll preface that. But giving students some of that data and say, okay, here's the county issues, what do you see as issues being in our school or with our students? And what do we want to work towards? What do we need to address as a school to create a safer environment, to reduce anxiety and mental health issues with our students? How can we be a resource, and how can we move the needle of this data? And really asking the students. But honestly, a lot of it is giving students the opportunity to practice those skills. We can give them all of this opportunity for leadership, but if they haven't practiced it and I don't want to say mastered it, but have a pretty good understanding of that, it's going to be really hard for them to focus. And oftentimes, I also teach Michigan Model for Health, and it is very skills focused. And oftentimes what I see is when time's running short, or if it might be a comfort issue with the teacher, is they will skip the practice. They'll talk about how to do the skill, but they'll skip the actual role playing or the practice of that skill to reinforce it. And I just want to say, students need that opportunity to practice in a safe, controlled, supervised area. When they've mastered it in your classroom, they're more likely to utilize that skill when you're not around. And so giving them that opportunity to practice those pieces. And then finding student passions, identify how they can advocate in and out of school. You have so many students with a vast number of experiences and passions. And when you create that safe environment and you create those opportunities to, for them to grow and help others, then that empowers them to do the work. We do nutrition programming at the elementary level, and I had a student parent text me because we work together. So she's like, my daughter just took your student survey, and it was around fruits and vegetables, but the survey asks, are you a boy or are you a girl? And she goes, my daughter just feels like we're excluding some students and that there should be more than two options. And I just thought, one, she was fourth grader, telling me that. And I said, I so appreciate her advocacy and her empathy for her peers. I'm going to share this with our funder. And so I shared it with our funder, and they changed the survey for this year to include 4 options. So, they have boy and girl, because this is for pretty young students. They have boy, girl. No, I prefer not to say, and something like my choice isn't listed, and it gave them an opportunity to fill in if they chose to. But how powerful. And so I created a certificate for, her as far as being an advocate for youth, and how powerful that is. When we do see a student advocating for something, how do we lift them up so they want to continue that work? And then how do we give them the skills to kind of lead that charge? Because we have it, you can be an advocate, doesn't matter how old, from 4th grade up to, adulthood. We can all be advocates for individuals. A few other skill building activities are, I like name the emotion. It's kind of, if you're familiar with the more elementary zones of regulation, how do you create kind of an adult version of name that emotion? How are you feeling today walking into the classroom? Because I think if you can get that temperature of your class, can we move on to learning, or do we need to pause and maybe do a mindless activity, or do a team building activity, or is someone having a really bad day and they just need to be heard for 3 minutes from the group, and then the group lifts them up. Naming that emotion at the start of the class really gives you an idea of where your students are before you start. Because if we don't address it, it will eventually be addressed during the course of the class period. So finding those ways of just figuring that out. We have a transition center school where our students with disabilities attend, and they actually did a modified zones of regulation similar to this, but they actually made it public, like in their classroom. Some people will do it like on a Google form or something like that, and keep it a little more private that just the teacher hears, but they actually put it on a whiteboard and had the students place where they were at. And what they found was the peers looked to see who was maybe in that red or in that sad category, and then they lifted up those students. The teacher didn't have to. And they said that it was such a powerful thing for the adults to see in the school, because the adults didn't really have to do anything. The students would see that, Amy is having a bad day today, and they would make a joke, or they would try to comfort, or they would ask questions. And all of a sudden, it was the students leading that work and not the adults in the building. And so I thought that was really, really neat. Write down their worry. How many of you, I'm guilty as charged, have been angry, upset, frustrated, typed up an email, and let it set because you were smart enough to go, I am not hitting send. And then you go back to it. There's a good reason why they say don't go to a coach. 24-hour rule with coaches, right? Same thing. I would claim the 24-hour rule on whenever you're feeling overly emotional before speaking, right? Or writing things down. And then you come back to it and you read it and you're like, okay, I feel better, and you delete it, right? It was just getting it out. This is the same version for students to be able to do in their class, in class, right? So they can write down their worry, what's bothering them. This is a great activity to do before the class starts. They can rip it up, they can ball it up, toss it in the garbage can, and it's out. It doesn't fully take the worry away, but what it does do is it takes some of the power of that worry away just by simple writing it down. I don't know how it works, but it does. And so that's an activity. Getting kids up and moving. If you can get them moving, that's going to do wonders for blood flow, doing a physical activity before assessments or tests, doing some kind of deep breathing. If you have anxious students before exams, things like that. Another piece is appreciation, apology, and aha. This is great at the end of the day. So you get the students in a big circle, and you can do this at the end of your class period or at the end of the day. And they have to pick one of those 3 A's. So they can share what they appreciated that day. They can apologize if they wronged someone that day, or maybe they weren't fully present during your class, or they can list what an aha moment was for them that day. And again, it's building that community. It's getting them to get in touch with what they're feeling. It's just a pretty powerful, there's a video online, I think through Edutopia, that really shows this in action, and it's pretty neat to watch. And then any kind of peer-to-peer or mentoring programs that you can get in there in your building is helpful. because they're more likely to listen to their peers, right? So how do you identify who those peer leaders are? And then what do we need to do to build up their skill set to be able to help mentor new students coming into your building, or someone who's struggling with the content? How do you mentor and match them up and kind of build that system of support for your students? Ooh, ACT approach at home. ACT. Acknowledge your emotion, calm down in your safe place, and talk about it. I love that. I think we can do a better job at giving students time to get their feelings under control. So when I talk about trauma, I'm like, you are not going to be able to rationally have a conversation with a student who's dysregulated. You need to allow them to calm down. And when they're able to calm down, they're able to think through the process and be able to talk about what happened and what they were feeling. They're not going to do that when they're still emotional. And giving them that time, I think, is key. We have like, what, 9 minutes, Brenda? About, I think, 10.
That's correct.
All right. So what questions do you all have? What didn't I hit on? What are you needing more of? What are you going to do Monday when you are back in the
Amy?
classroom? Yes.
This is silly, but real quick, what was DEI? At the beginning, you
Yes.
were talking about SEL and DEI. Was it something to do with ethnic?
It's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Inclusion. Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your faces. What are you already using and doing that you didn't put in the chat that I didn't talk about? Because I always love learning from you. I'm a collector of great ideas and then a sharer outer. And I always say these come from other teachers, right? Like I learn from you and then I share out your awesomeness.
I can share. My name is Rachel. I'm a counselor at an alternative high school in Southgate. I just started this year at this school. It's my first time in an alternative school. I've noticed a pattern in when students come up to me or come into my office upset. Either they're crying or they're just in some kind of emotional state. They tell me that what they're feeling is dumb and they apologize for wasting my time. I have found that just looking at them and telling them that what they feel is real and they are worthy of the time that it takes to process through those things and that they're not a burden to me. Just those kind of statements, like speaking to their value and that it is valuable. It's not dumb. It's very real because it's happening to them. It makes a huge difference. And it seems like just acknowledging that they're worth the time that it takes to process through those feelings, the floodgates kind of open. It's just been a really powerful, like someone said, acknowledging not only their feelings, but their self-worth and just their worth in general. That a lot of these students feel like they're not worth my time, or they're not worth, and so just acknowledging you're not a burden and you are worth it is really powerful, and it builds trust very quickly.
And I love that idea. It's so powerful when we acknowledge that what they're feeling is valid and what they're feeling is real, and not to diminish that. And I think it goes along too with our view and our perception of failure, and how failure isn't an end result. Failure isn't a label. We grow into, we grow when something doesn't go the way we need it to go, or what we thought the answer was. We grow from that, and we learn what worked, what didn't work. But I feel like our students need assistance on one, identifying what they're feeling, two, acknowledging how it makes them feel. But how do we help them process through that? How do we help them build the skills of and realize that no feeling is dumb, just like no question is dumb, no and that's what we're here for. We are social beings and we need to support one another. No one should be going through all of this on their own. And so it might be a battle we continue to fight based on the environments our students are coming from. That might be a message they're hearing outside of the school setting, and we need to show them that this is not the norm in our community, in our school, that we're here to support each other. I also noticed too, because my background's in social work, and before I did this work, I was a substance abuse treatment therapist for teens, and oftentimes my kiddos, my teens everything was anger, right? Everyone was, I'm just so mad. And then when we would dig into it and we'd start putting labels and asking questions, anger was kind of a secondary feeling. Anger isn't a socially accepted emotion to have for the most part. And really what they were feeling was vulnerable or embarrassed or hurt. And so really helping them to branch out and look at the varying levels of anger and what it actually might be. So they have a feeling wheel that's pretty cool, that has the basic ones in the core, and then they kind of expand out into more detailed feelings. And I think that's key too, is getting students to understand. And then when I'm feeling this way, this is what's going on in my body, because it helps them label that too. Laura, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, actually, I was going to share. I see Patsy's on here too, that you're reminding me too. We had an affirmation board, and that's gone over huge. And it's like, I got to keep remembering, go back to that, because we don't have students as consistent as before, or have like just the traditional classroom of, everyone that comes in. And so you got hit and miss. But when you would see somebody, and it wasn't our idea, we got it from a workshop too, to make this affirmation board. With just little stickers, you can do it, I believe in you, and you would see a person take one of these stickers, and later on you walk by their desk and they've traced it, or they've, they really make it their own. And you're like, man, they needed to hear that. It reminds me now, we got to go back to all that stuff.
We do have to go back to that stuff. It's so important. This week, someone talked about a kindness tree, which kind of sounds very similar. And she said, at first it was teachers putting just kindness, random acts of kindness that they witnessed. And before too long, students were writing what they saw in the hallways and in the classrooms. And she said, by a few months into it, the whole bulletin board was just covered in these leaves of kindness. And she said, it's something that we will continue to do every year, because it was so powerful. And what it does do is it focuses kids on, and adults on, focusing on that positive behavior, right? And seeing all the positives going on in the school and making that the norm.
Are there any other questions for Amy? Awesome. Amy, thank you so much. You made me do a lot of reflecting while listening to you. And some of these things I wish I'd known when I was first teaching that I never knew. It would have made my teaching job so much easier. So
Yeah.
Thank you all, and thank you everyone for joining. It was fabulous. So have a great rest of the morning, and we'll see you at the exhibitor's room. Bye, everyone.
Bye.